Hello and welcome to Science and Sleep, where we open the door together to the strangest and most mysterious things science has ever revealed. Here, your curiosity is not only nurtured, but also guided through adventures that go beyond clocks and everyday history. Tonight, we will travel to an ancient era, so vast and overwhelming that even the word ancient seems too small. Stay with us until the end of this journey, because every moment brings an unexpected piece of the puzzle. And don't forget to hit subscribe along with the little bell icon so you won't miss the next exciting adventures. To step into the Mesozoic era, we need to change the way we perceive the Earth. This is not a fixed destination, but a continuous flow, where continents, climate, and life itself are all in motion. Seen from the distance of hundreds of millions of years, this planet does not stand still, but resembles a living body, breathing, trembling, and recreating itself. What makes the Mesozoic special is not only the appearance of dinosaurs, but the entire stage into which they were born and grew. Dinosaurs were only the standout characters in a vast play where the sky, oceans, and vegetation played indispensable roles. Imagine yourself floating above Pangaea, the great supercontinent that covered nearly the entire surface of the planet. From above, the land stretched endlessly, interrupted only by blazing red mountain ranges and arid valleys. The seas, instead of surrounding the continents as they do today, were gathered into one immense ocean, so vast that modern humans can hardly imagine it. In the atmosphere, oxygen and carbon dioxide levels fluctuated strangely, making the forests release an unfamiliar, pungent, and humid scent. Volcanoes were everywhere, smoke and ash blanketing the skies, sometimes altering the climate within just a few generations. This world was not static. It was like a vast laboratory where evolution tested abilities never seen before. In that context, life did not appear all at once, but gradually filled the void after the mass extinction at the end of the Permian. When most species were wiped out, nature was like a painter forced to start over on a blank canvas. At first, there were only small, simple creatures, patiently seeking a place in the new ecosystems, but step by step, they expanded, transforming into more diverse forms. This was when evolutionary history began writing bold new chapters. Let's descend to the ground. You would see parched lands stretching to the horizon where only a few hardy plants could endure. Gymnosperms, ancestors of pines, cypresses, and redwoods, rose like solitary warriors, scattered across barren plains. If you followed the rivers, the landscape would change. There, water carved green ribbons, refuges for amphibians, fish, and small reptiles. This was also where the earliest dinosaur like creatures began to appear. They were not yet gigantic, not yet majestic as the images we know, but within them lay the potential to ignite a new era. As time passed, nature grew increasingly complex. Dense forests emerged, their canopies closing off sunlight. The air was heavy with moisture and resin, carrying a pungent, unforgettable scent. Beneath your feet, ferns grew in thick carpets, towering above a person's head. The insects of that time were larger than we imagine, their heavy wings beating through the still air. This was a green world, but not yet one adorned with flowers. Flowers would not bloom until the end of the Mesozoic, meaning that for most of this era, the forests were clothed only in monotonous shades of green, mingled with browns and grays. And yet, it was precisely this simplicity that nourished rich and diverse ecosystems. And what about the sky? If you looked up, you would not see flocks of modern birds we are familiar with. Instead, there were pterosaurs, flying reptiles with wings like living kites. Some were small, easily gliding around coastlines. Others were enormous, with wingspans as long as a small airplane, their shadows stretching across the sand. It was a sky both beautiful and terrifying, where life experimented with an entirely new form of movement, flight. Beneath the oceans, another story was being written. These were not seas of familiar fish, but the realm of giant marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs, sleek-bodied like dolphins, darted like silver arrows. Long-necked plesiosaurs stretched their heads above the surface like creatures of legend. And later, mosasaurs, colossal sea monsters, dominated the waters. Around them, ammonites drifted in schools, while corals and sponges built reefs strange and unlike any tropical coral reefs you have ever known. Looking at the whole, we realize that the Mesozoic was not merely an age of giant animals, but an age of experimentation for the entire planet. From sweltering greenhouse climates to brief periods of cooling, from the breakup of Pangaea into smaller continents to the isolation that fostered unique life forms, all were great upheavals that wrote history. In each change, nature never disappeared but restructured, turning the old into the foundation for the new. That is why, when thinking of the Mesozoic, we should not only remember dinosaurs. Yes, they are powerful symbols, but not the whole story. This era was a grand experiment of life, an epic chapter lasting nearly 200 million years. And the most fascinating thing is that every rock layer, every fossil, every vein of sediment today still holds a fragment of memory from that time. What remains is not only dinosaur bones, but an entire record of the planet, of how it recreated itself, healed itself, and allowed life to rise again after catastrophe. The world of the Mesozoic was never a still painting. If we were to set foot on a vast plain in the middle of the Jurassic, the first sight would likely be herds of giant herbivorous dinosaurs moving leisurely. They were like massive biological machines, their necks reaching up to the treetops, each step making the ground tremble. But look more closely. Dinosaurs were not the sole rulers of the scene. Beneath their feet, swarms of tiny insects crawled, silently recycling dead leaves, decomposing wood, and enriching the soil with fresh humus. Without them, the forests would quickly suffocate under their own fallen leaves. In the skies, winged reptiles glided on warm currents, their sharp eyes scanning the ground. They were not only hunters, but also connectors between sky and earth, carrying the movements and echoes of life. Every creature, whether small or colossal, was a link in the chain. Walking along a river, the landscape revealed another aspect of life. Beneath the murky waters, relatives of crocodiles, archosaurs, lurked in ambush. They did not need the long strides of dinosaurs, nor the membranous wings of pterosaurs. Their power lay in patience. When a small dinosaur or reptile bent to drink, they would lunge, jaws locking tight, dragging the prey into the water. In that moment, we understand that the Mesozoic was not only an age of giants, but also a stage for diverse survival strategies. If we ventured deep into the forest, other characters emerged. There were no bright flowers as today, but instead forests of conifers, ginkgos, and giant ferns. Gymnosperms rose tall, casting shade and forming dense canopies. Under the trees, primitive mammals crept cautiously. Small and humble, they were mostly nocturnal, avoiding the watchful eyes of daytime predators. Yet in their hidden lives, they began to develop traits that would later become strengths of the entire class. Sharp senses, parental care, and an opportunistic lifestyle, adaptable to every ecological niche. The marine world was no less lively. Submerging ourselves into the oceans of the Cretaceous, we would see a kingdom entirely different. Ichthyosaurs darted like silver arrows, chasing glittering schools of fish. Further out, long-necked plesiosaurs arched their necks, their heads rising above the waves like legendary silhouettes. And then there were the mosasaurs, colossal hunters with powerful bodies and sharp teeth, true kings of the seas. Amid this world, ammonites drifted, their spiral shells reflecting light underwater, reminders that the oceans had never lacked richness. And just like on land, every marine creature was connected, from the smallest corals to the top predators. What made the Mesozoic magnificent was interaction. Dinosaurs did not exist like isolated statues in museums. They lived among countless neighbors. When herds of sauropods stripped leaves from the trees, they opened gaps in the canopy for sunlight to reach the forest floor, nourishing ferns and smaller plants. When they fell, their carcasses became sources of life for predators and scavengers. When pterosaurs soared, they disturbed schools of fish, indirectly creating opportunities for aquatic hunters. When insects buzzed, they were not only chewing leaves, but also taking the first experimental steps toward pollination, a turning point for the future of flowering plants. That world was like a symphony, where every note, low or high, mattered. Imagine a swamp at the end of the Cretaceous. Along the water's edge, herds of hadrosaurs bent to graze, their massive bodies leaving resonant echoes in the humid air. Their calls, deep and booming, rolled through the reeds like an ancient language exchanged between parents and offspring. Nearby, small mammals scurried through the undergrowth, tiny hands gripping tree trunks, carefully collecting seeds. Crocodiles slid quietly into the water, revealing only their cold eyes. And above, pterosaurs with wingspans longer than a car drifted like giant phantoms. This was not a stage solely for dinosaurs. It was a crowded, multi-layered world where life was tightly interwoven. Plants, too, were crucial witnesses. Before flowers appeared, ecosystems revolved around gymnosperms. But when flowering plants first bloomed in the Cretaceous, the entire planet seemed to shift. Flowers drew in pollinating insects, seeds and fruits attracted seed eaters, and from there, ecosystems exploded in diversity. The birth of a single small flower transformed the rhythm of the forest, and dinosaurs too were swept into that current. Looking at the whole picture, the Mesozoic was not merely a reptile age, as textbooks often say. It was a connected world where every creature, from the mosquito buzzing in the dark to the sauropod taller than a building, helped shape the existence of others. Dinosaurs may claim the spotlight in our imagination, but their neighbors, from insects and trees to tiny mammals, were the threads that wove the ecological fabric. And when we listen to that world with imagination, we realize it is not alien to the present. Even today, we live within a survival network where every movement, every change sends ripples across the entire planet. If you could stand on a seashore more than 150 million years ago, the scene before you would resemble no ocean we know today. The sea was deep blue yet fierce, teeming with giant predators. Schools of primitive fish, glimmering silver, were torn apart when an ichthyosaur burst from the water like a living spear. Its streamlined body recalled that of modern dolphins, but its enormous eyes, sharp teeth, and extraordinary power made it one of the most perfect hunters of the Triassic and Jurassic. At the same time, in coastal waters, plesiosaurs with endlessly long necks weaved through shoals of fish, snapping up prey with their small but lightning-fast heads. Seen from afar, they could be mistaken for creatures of legend rather than products of evolution. But then, as the Cretaceous began, new rulers appeared. Mosasaurs. Descended from land-dwelling lizards, in just a few million years they had evolved into colossal ocean crocodiles, over 15 meters long, with muscular bodies, powerful tails, and jaws capable of swallowing a sea turtle whole in an instant. They swam at speeds that even primitive sharks avoided, and fossils show they did not hesitate to prey on their own kind. In that role, mosasaurs were the true killer whales of the Mesozoic, turning the seas into battlefields of survival. Yet the grandeur of the Mesozoic was not confined beneath the waves. Looking up, you would see the mighty wings of pterosaurs beating, some with spans of over 10 meters. Certain species soared like modern albatrosses, crossing vast oceans in search of prey. Others, smaller, behaved like bats, hunting insects in dense forests. For 150 million years, pterosaurs held dominion over the skies far longer than birds have today. If birds are the successful descendants of dinosaurs, then pterosaurs were the bold experiment of evolution in conquering the air. On land, dinosaurs underwent an unprecedented morphological revolution, from armored stegosaurs with great plates along their backs, to ceratopsians with mighty horns, to giants like Argentinosaurus towering as high as a 4-story building. Alongside them came predators like Spinosaurus, the semi-aquatic dinosaur, or Tyrannosaurus rex, with one of the most powerful bites in natural history, asserting their dominance. Each species was not merely a giant dinosaur, but an evolutionary specialist, fine-tuning its body to adapt to every environment, from arid deserts to humid forests. The Earth's landscape, too, did not stand still. At the beginning of the Mesozoic, all land was joined in the supercontinent Pangaea, where deserts stretched endlessly under a hot, dry climate. But over time, Pangaea fractured, the land masses drifted, opening inland seas, creating volcanoes, and forming isolated ecosystems. This very fragmentation spurred evolution. Isolated populations developed along different paths, leading to the immense diversity we see in fossils today. A species in South America might evolve into a form entirely different from its relatives in Asia or Africa, simply because their environments and conditions were distinct. The climate also underwent major shifts. The Triassic began hot and dry with scarcely any forests. By the Jurassic, the atmosphere grew wetter, lush forests spread across the continents and supported giant herbivorous dinosaurs. By the Cretaceous, powerful greenhouse effects melted ice, raised sea levels, and flooded shallow seas across the land, creating fertile coastal plains. Throughout nearly 200 million years, reptiles not only survived, but adapted and thrived in every change, demonstrating astonishing resilience. The most remarkable thing was that evolution never ceased. The Mesozoic was not a static golden age, but a continuous symphony of emergence and disappearance. The celebrated stegosaurs of the Jurassic gave way to ceratopsians and hadrosaurs of the Cretaceous. The small, agile predators of the Triassic vanished, replaced by kings like T. rex. Fossils are like pages marking each wave of change, reminding us that even in an era that seemed stable, nature was always in motion. And that is the greatest lesson the Mesozoic leaves behind. Looking across 200 million years of reptiles, we clearly see the miracle of evolution. Tiny advantages accumulated over time were enough to reshape the entire planet. Without those bold experiments, reptiles entering the sea to become ichthyosaurs, lizards taking to the air to become pterosaurs, or small creatures evolving into colossal dinosaurs, the world today would be utterly different. Birds, mammals, even humans exist only thanks to that legacy. The Mesozoic was not merely the age of dinosaurs, but proof of life's boundless creative power. When you close your eyes and imagine the ocean of the Mesozoic, you will see a world both familiar and strange. The sea still rose and fell with the rhythm of the tides, but the life within it was vastly different from today's oceans. Hidden beneath the foaming waves were countless biological rhythms that shaped the entire planet. Primitive fish, the ancestors of most modern species, began to disperse everywhere. From the Jurassic to the Cretaceous, they expanded their forms, adapting to every ecological niche. Some concealed themselves close to the seafloor, some roamed the open waters, and others specialized in ambush from the shadows. Each shimmering scale reflected the sunlight filtering down through the water like tiny mirrors, creating a flickering, ever-shifting curtain. At the same time, sharks were already present, but in this grand tableau, they were not the rulers. Their soft, cartilaginous skeletons rarely fossilized, but their teeth remained scattered in the rock record, blades of time still sharp. They hunted silently, weaving through fields of plankton. It was these tiny, almost invisible creatures that were the true foundation of the ocean. Phytoplankton drifted with the currents, absorbing sunlight and releasing oxygen. Zooplankton swam hesitantly, becoming food for small fish, which in turn fed larger fish and ultimately served as prey for colossal monsters like ichthyosaurs or mosasaurs. That food chain, beginning with the tiniest organisms, still holds true to this day. A magnificent testament to the resilience of plankton is the vast chalk deposits stretching for hundreds of kilometers across Europe. The white cliffs of Dover, still standing proudly along England's coast, are in fact the accumulated remains of countless plankton shells during the Cretaceous. Each tiny particle sank to the seafloor tens of millions of years ago, and together they now form a geological wonder. Looking at them, we see clearly that the smallest beings can leave behind a legacy greater than any empire of humankind. Alongside the oceans, the land painted an equally marvelous picture. Mesozoic Earth was a planet defined by forests, but do not search yet for the bright blossoms we know today. They had not bloomed. Instead, the world was cloaked in towering conifers, junipers, pines, and ancient ferns. Beneath their canopy, horsetails and seed ferns formed lush green carpets, waist-high, creating dense and humid forests. Here, giant herbivorous dinosaurs found the energy to sustain their towering bodies. Among these green legacies, the ginkgo stood out as a remarkable survivor. Today, only one species remains, cultivated in gardens and cities, but in the Mesozoic, they spread widely across primeval forests. Their fan-shaped leaves once swayed in the wind alongside the heavy footsteps of massive sauropods. The nutrient-rich seeds may well have fed both reptiles and primitive mammals. It is strange to think that a tree you see in a park today once bore witness to the age of the dinosaurs. Then came a turning point, the emergence of flowering plants in the late Cretaceous. At first, they were only small species living in the shade beneath the conifer forests. But flowers introduced a new reproductive strategy, attracting insects and birds to carry pollen, quickly outcompeting the wind-pollinated gymnosperms. Fruits, with their colors, scents, and sweetness, evolved as a way to entice animals to eat and disperse their seeds. Within just tens of millions of years, the conifer forests began to intermingle with bright splashes of yellow, red, and purple flowers. A landscape once dominated by green and brown now burst alive with colors never before seen. The rise of flowers not only transformed the face of the forests, but also restructured the animal world. Insects, once mere leaf biters and scavengers of plant debris, now became professional pollinators. Though bees had not yet evolved, many butterflies and beetles were already adapting to the shapes and scents of flowers. A new web of symbiosis was woven. Plants relied on insects to reproduce, while insects depended on nectar to survive. Here, the complex ecological relationships, precursors of today's systems, first began to spin the web of life. All these changes unfolded against the backdrop of a global greenhouse climate. The Mesozoic Earth was much warmer than today. There were no permanent ice caps, and forests grew almost to the poles. Fossilized wood and leaves found in modern Greenland and Antarctica show that even there, lush forests once thrived. As sea levels rose, shallow seas flooded the continents, warming the climate and offering fertile habitats for life. When the waters retreated, deserts expanded, challenging the adaptability of both plants and animals. This rhythm of ocean and land sculpted the planet for nearly 200 million years. And when we put it all together, the bustling seas, the endless green forests, the skies filled with pterosaurs, we realize that the Mesozoic was not just the age of dinosaurs. It was a complete world, where land and sea, plant and beast, the tiny and the colossal, all took part in an evolutionary symphony. And each rhythm of that symphony still echoes today, in the pines, in the waves, and in the small flowers blooming by the roadside. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a forest in the Mesozoic era. There are no familiar birdsong as today, but instead the rustling of ferns as tall as a human, the echoing calls of an ancient lizard species, and the heavy thuds of dinosaur footsteps making the ground tremble with every beat. The sky above is unlike the sky we know. A thick layer of carbon dioxide in the air makes the sunlight turn into a warm yellow as it passes through, casting the entire forest in a subdued reddish hue. When you take a deep breath, you sense not only the smell of damp wood and humus, but also a pungent, resinous sharpness from conifer sap, as if nature itself were exhaling a primordial chemical blend. In that world, plants were not just a backdrop, they were the architects of life. Towering conifers reached high, their bark thick and hard, leaving room for lush ferns to grow crowded beneath. Flowering plants, the new and daring creatures of the Cretaceous, began to bloom, covering the ground with petals rich in color and fragrance. They transformed the entire ecosystem. Bees and insects sought nectar, birds and small reptiles found new sources of food, and gradually the entire food chain was reshaped. Each blossoming flower was a signal that Earth was moving closer to the world we are familiar with today. Dinosaurs, of course, were the main characters in that picture. But they should not be imagined only as giants stomping across empty plains. In fact, most dinosaurs lived with and within forests. Giant herbivores like Brachiosaurus raised their long necks to pluck leaves from the tallest canopies, while smaller, swifter species hid among the undergrowth to avoid predators. Even terrifying carnivores like Allosaurus or Tyrannosaurus depended on the forest, lurking in the shadows, using the dense vegetation to ambush prey. Without forests, there would have been no stage for those breathless chases to unfold. But behind every forest, there was always an invisible force shaping it: the atmosphere. After the extinction disaster at the end of the Permian, Earth entered the Triassic with skies full of volcanic dust and carbon dioxide levels soaring. The climate was hot and arid, turning most of the supercontinent Pangaea into a vast desert. Yet out of that harshness, reptiles with strong lungs and high heat tolerance thrived. As oxygen levels rose in the Jurassic, nature expanded its experiments. Dinosaurs grew ever larger, their circulatory systems worked more efficiently, and the world teemed with giants we now know only through fossils. Atmospheric change also left its mark in the smallest details. More oxygen not only allowed animals to grow larger, but also enabled insects to reach gigantic sizes compared to today. Imagine a dragonfly with a wingspan of a meter gliding over a forest pond. Or picture that the rustling sound came not only from leaves, but also from millions of fern spores spreading through the air, weaving together a very distinct Mesozoic scent. By the Cretaceous, the climate once again transformed. Carbon dioxide rose high, making the greenhouse effect stronger than ever. Permafrost nearly disappeared, and the polar regions, instead of being icy as today, were covered in ginkgo and conifer forests. North America was split by an inland sea. turning many areas into swamps and deltas. Europe became a lush archipelago. Everywhere, flowering plants spread widely, bringing color, fragrance, and new sources of life to countless creatures. Forests grew more diverse than ever, where each plant was not merely an individual organism, but the foundation of entire complex ecosystems. The wonder is this: these harsh upheavals did not destroy life, but instead opened the path to abundance. Every volcanic eruption, every change in atmospheric composition was like an invisible hand sculpting the world, challenging and then rebalancing it. The patience of plants, the adaptability of dinosaurs, the intricacy of insects, all testified to one truth. Life did not merely persist, it seized its circumstances to evolve in directions never before imagined. And when we look back from a distance of millions of years, what makes the Mesozoic so fascinating is not only the giant creatures that once ruled, but the way Earth redrew itself. Forests, atmosphere, seas, volcanoes, all merged into a colossal symphony where each rhythmic change opened a new chapter for life. It was not just an ancient era, but a mirror reflecting the boundless adaptability and transformation of this planet, a power that continues right beneath our feet today. If the Triassic was the dawn of recovery, then the Jurassic was the blazing noon of the Mesozoic. When the lava eruptions of the late Triassic subsided, Earth entered an unusually stable rhythm. No longer were there endless stretches of arid desert. Green forests began to spread, covering valleys and plains. The skies were warm, rains fell steadily, rivers and lakes nourished life. It was in this climate that dinosaurs rose from humble survivors to become the true giants of the planet. The picture of the Jurassic was a magnificent world. On conifer fields, Brachiosaurus stood towering like moving towers, their necks reaching up to the highest branches to pluck tender leaves. Beneath the dense forest canopy, Stegosaurus moved quietly, their backs adorned with upright plates, as if nature had gifted them with a stone-like armor. Along the riverbanks, cunning predators such as Allosaurus lurked, their cold eyes fixed on the slightest movement of prey. Earth was then a colossal stage where every species played its role in a dramatic play of survival. Not only the land, but also the skies and oceans exploded with life. When you looked up, you would see the vast wings of pterosaurs slicing through the air, gliding above like giant kites. Their fragile yet powerful wings allowed them to travel far, with wingspans reaching more than 10 meters in some species. In the water, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs reigned, their bodies sleek like dolphins, yet carrying the grace of reptiles. The seas resounded with the echoes of endless chases: squid, ammonites, bony fish, and colossal hunters, all weaving together a fierce dance beneath the waves. What laid the foundation for this prosperity, once again, was the atmosphere. During the Jurassic, carbon dioxide levels remained high, keeping Earth warm from pole to pole. There were no ice caps, not even near the polar regions where forests still cast their shade. Dense vegetation turned the planet into a colossal photosynthesis factory, supplying energy to the enormous food chains. Giant dinosaurs could exist not only thanks to their special lungs, but also because this world offered nearly limitless greenery. Yet prosperity did not mean stillness. The supercontinent Pangaea began to rift, opening new oceans. The Tethys Sea spread wide, and each fracture created fertile continental shelves. Landscapes were constantly changing. Mountains rose, seas invaded plains, lava flows covered the land only to be slowly reclaimed by moss and ferns. Nature was both destroyer and creator, erasing and rewriting on the vast tablet of geology. By the Cretaceous, Earth once again wore a new face. Flowering plants, after developing quietly for a long time, now burst across the planet. Bright petals and fragrances attracted bees, butterflies, and insects, opening a wholly new form of symbiosis. Ancient birds, ancestors of those we know today, began to weave among the treetops, helping spread seeds. The world became more diverse than ever, not only in the number of species, but also in strategies for survival. Dinosaurs of the Cretaceous also reached their peak in diversity and abundance. Giant herbivores like titanosaurs ruled the plains, while fearsome predators such as Tyrannosaurus rex roamed North America. Herds of massive hadrosaurs migrated across grasslands, their footsteps leaving deep prints along muddy riverbanks. High above, colossal pterosaurs like Quetzalcoatlus soared, their wingspans longer than a small airplane. This world was so saturated with life that every forest, every coastline, every lake echoed with roars, hisses, and the beat of wings. Yet beneath this prosperity, the atmosphere was preparing for a devastating shock. At the end of the Cretaceous, massive eruptions in what is now India, the Deccan Traps, released millions of tons of greenhouse gases into the air. Earth grew hotter, ecosystems began to falter. And then the asteroid impact on the Yucatan Peninsula ended the era. In a moment, dust and volcanic ash filled the skies, sunlight vanished, and a global winter descended. The very air that had once nourished life now became a death sentence for the dinosaurs. Even so, looking back at nearly 200 million years, the Mesozoic atmosphere remained a rare balance. It was rich enough in oxygen to allow giant creatures to thrive, rich enough in carbon dioxide to sustain dense vegetation, and stable enough for life to expand without cease. In every dinosaur's breath, in every gust of wind through the forests of cycads and conifers, pulsed the rhythm of a different world, one that laid the foundation for the Earth we know today. And perhaps what fascinates us most about that era is not just the giant creatures, but the way the atmosphere, invisible, silent, made it all possible. When you imagine standing in a Mesozoic forest, try closing your eyes and taking a breath. You would not only smell resin and hear roars and hisses, but also feel the very breath of the planet, the force that nurtured, tested, and then renewed life on a colossal scale. That was the gift of the atmosphere, and also the profound lesson about the fragility and resilience of life. When we look back at the Triassic, we don't just see the beginning of dinosaurs, but also a world that was experimenting with itself. It was a stage where Earth resembled a giant laboratory, where countless reptiles, plants, and even the climate constantly collided, transformed, and began again. What made this period special was not grandeur from the start, but rather its fragility and the patient process of renewal. After the mass extinction at the end of the Permian, a catastrophe that wiped out nearly 90% of life on the planet, the Triassic opened like a fresh scar, but also as fertile ground for evolutionary experiments. The survivors had to find ways to adapt to an arid Earth, a harsh climate, with the supercontinent Pangaea stretching out like a vast desert. In that landscape, life did not merely endure, but also found a way to reinvent itself. Plants began to rise on barren lands. Insects altered their diets, testing different lifestyles. And reptiles, a group steadily diversifying, became gamblers in a world full of empty niches. What's interesting is that dinosaurs did not appear as giants right from the start. If you turned back time some 230 million years, you would not encounter towering Brachiosaurus or fearsome Tyrannosaurus. Instead, you would see modest creatures, even easy to overlook. The earliest dinosaurs were only the size of a large dog, with light bones, nimble movements, and teeth adapted to eat whatever was within reach. A typical example is Eoraptor, a creature less than 1 meter long, capable of hunting insects or scavenging for food. It was neither a specialized predator nor a giant herbivore, simply an opportunist surviving through flexibility. Alongside it, Herrerasaurus, about 3 meters long, had taken one more evolutionary step. It had sharp teeth, strong legs for pursuit, and a clearer ability to hunt. Yet even then, dinosaurs were only one among countless evolutionary options. Crocodile relatives, with armored bodies, massive forms, and diverse lifestyles, were the true dominant players of Triassic ecosystems. Dinosaurs at that point were more like minor characters in a play where they had yet to become the stars. So, what allowed them to gradually break through? The answer lay in differences in body structure. While many other reptiles moved with legs splayed to the sides, dinosaurs had an upright stance with legs positioned directly beneath their bodies. That made them efficient walkers and endurance runners, able to travel far without expending too much energy. Their light skeletons and more efficient lungs, similar to modern birds, allowed them to maximize oxygen intake. These advantages didn't make them rulers immediately, but they were small steps that accumulated over time. The Triassic Earth also played an important role in selection. With its hot, dry climate, vast stretches of land, and scarce water, only creatures that could move well and withstand harsh conditions had a chance to survive. Dinosaurs, thanks to their unique body design, could spread into different geographic regions. They did not dominate right away, but they spread, expanded, and quietly laid the foundation for a long era ahead. Then a turning point arrived, not because dinosaurs evolved with lightning speed, but because another mass extinction rewrote the rules. At the end of the Triassic, massive volcanic eruptions released enormous amounts of gas into the atmosphere, triggering global climate upheavals. Ecosystems fell into chaos. Once dominant reptile groups, including many crocodile relatives, collapsed. Amphibian diversity was also wiped out, and in the empty ecological spaces left behind, dinosaurs, small but resilient, endured. When the volcanic dust settled, Earth entered the Jurassic. This was when dinosaurs truly exploded. From small creatures, they rapidly diversified. Some evolved into gigantic sauropods with long necks reaching into treetops, feeding on leaves without fear of shortage. Others became theropods, sophisticated predators, ancestors of today's birds. Some species developed herd behavior, others built nests, and some even cared for their young, a rare evolutionary advantage that increased survival rates. The wonder here is that it all began with small steps. There was no instant leap, only patience, experimentation, and adaptation. That is why the story of the dinosaurs' rise is not one of absolute power, but of flexibility, of seizing opportunities when disaster opened new doors. If you could travel back to a Triassic forest standing among the low ferns, you would see this clearly. The first dinosaur to walk past would not terrify you. It would be small, nimble, perhaps only reaching your knee. Another, 3 meters long, might dart by in pursuit of small prey. The scene would pale in comparison to the massive armored reptiles nearby. Yet from those seemingly ordinary creatures, history wrote an era that lasted more than 160 million years. Dinosaurs succeeded not because they were the strongest, but because they were the most persistent. This planet, time and again, has taught life the same lesson. The survivors are not necessarily the biggest, but those who adapt and wait for the right moment. Dinosaurs did exactly that. From marginal players, they became the eternal icons of an entire age. As the Jurassic period progressed, this world kept changing, and with it, the dinosaurs continued to expand their dominance. It was not only the story of gigantic creatures stretching their necks to the clouds or predators lurking in the shadows, but also a vivid picture of a planet in the process of recreating itself, opening up countless opportunities and challenges. It was within this turbulence that nature's creativity reached its peak, weaving millions of years into a symphony of life. On land, the gigantic sauropods grew ever larger. If at the beginning of the Jurassic they were only giants learning to walk, then by the later stages they had truly become symbols of natural power. With long necks, mighty tails, and enormous mass, each individual was like a biological machine optimized for grazing, moving, and surviving. Their expansion was not only due to their massive bodies, but also to their herd lifestyle, a collective strategy that helped protect the young, share food resources, and migrate across vast plains. Fossil traces show that the young moved huddled within the herd's protection, a scene perhaps both chaotic and magnificent, evoking the enduring instinct of life. But it was not only the giants that left their mark. Stegosaurus, with 2 rows of large plates along its back and a spiked tail, offered an unforgettable image. Those plates may have helped regulate body temperature while also serving as display tools, turning them into living billboards in the Jurassic forests. At lower levels, small but widespread ornithopods grazed on plants with their highly flexible jaws. They were not gigantic, but their persistence and adaptability laid the foundation for future success, when their descendants would become the dominant herbivores of the Cretaceous. And when food was always abundant, nature could not lack predators. Allosaurus was one of the stars of the Jurassic, with a large skull, serrated teeth, and a bone structure that allowed agile movement. They were not simply killing machines, but evidence of intelligent evolution. Fossil evidence of bite marks on bones and signs of cooperation suggest they may have hunted in groups, even attacking prey many times larger than themselves. Meanwhile, countless smaller theropods filled other ecological niches. Some stalked insects, others pursued medium-sized prey. Together, they formed a diverse predatory network, keeping the Jurassic ecosystem dynamic, balanced, and fierce. If one looked up to the sky, a completely different layer appeared. The heavens were far from peaceful. Pterosaurs, relatives of dinosaurs, had developed into many different forms, from tiny species with thin wings gliding through forests to giants soaring above ocean skies. Some specialized in catching fish, diving straight into the water with powerful plunges. Others ate insects, helping to keep ecosystems in balance. The sight of vast wings casting shadows on the ground became an inseparable part of the Jurassic, a world bustling not only on land but also in the air. The oceans of this time were another paradise. Unlike the lifeless seas of the late Triassic, by the Jurassic, the waters teemed with life. Ichthyosaurs, with dolphin like streamlined bodies, shot through the water in pursuit of fish schools. Plesiosaurs, with long necks and powerful paddle like limbs, glided through shallow waters, hunting patiently. And marine crocodiles lay in ambush at river mouths where currents brought swarms of small creatures. The marine ecosystem was no less vibrant than the land. Ammonites drifted like little spiral boats. Corals flourished again after the Permian collapse, and primitive sharks patrolled the deep waters. It was a world beneath the waves, full of color, proving that life was not limited to where dinosaurs walked. At the same time, vegetation remained the foundation that nourished all. Conifer forests stretched wide, ginkgo trees spread their fan-shaped leaves, ferns covered the ground, and horsetails grew along streams. This abundance provided enormous energy for populations of herbivores. The warm, humid, and stable climate made Earth resemble a giant greenhouse. Even near the poles, forests still grew lush, allowing life to expand into regions that today are covered in ice. It was a world in which nature seemed to favor life, creating conditions for both giants and the small to coexist. Yet what truly made the Jurassic special was not only the colossal scale of its creatures, but also their interconnections. Each herd of sauropods crossing the plains left gigantic marks on the earth. Each hunt of Allosaurus altered population balances. Each flock of pterosaurs circling in the sky added another layer of motion to the landscape. They did not merely live within the ecosystem. They were the ecosystem, the driving force of the planet's continual change. And within this setting, Earth itself was in constant motion. Tectonic plates kept drifting apart, oceans widened, and climate shifted across regions. This meant that dinosaur communities in North America, Europe, Africa, or Asia began to develop their own distinct traits, creating ever greater diversity. However, the same fundamental pattern repeated everywhere. Lush plants, gigantic herbivores, powerful predators. A grand ecological cycle maintained for tens of millions of years. Thus, the Jurassic was not just a chapter in Earth's history. It was an era when life reached unprecedented scales, proof that amid chaos and transformation, nature always found ways not only to survive, but to flourish magnificently. And at the heart of this glorious age were the dinosaurs, creatures that left not only fossil traces, but also deep marks in human imagination as eternal symbols of strength and grandeur. In the majestic panorama of the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, where giants held the power to shape ecosystems, the presence of silent yet equally terrifying predators also wove itself into every rhythm of life. If the sauropods were the embodiment of strength and scale, the theropods were the embodiment of dexterity, speed, and opportunism. They were not always the colossal killing machines portrayed by modern films. In reality, theropods were a diverse and highly creative group of evolution. Among them were tiny species, no taller than a human's knee, surviving on agility and pack hunting. Yet there were also species that rose to dominance at the top of the food chain, creatures powerful enough to challenge even the giant dinosaurs. In the shadowy valleys of the Jurassic, Allosaurus was the prime representative. Not as gigantic as the sauropods, but with sharp teeth and a skull designed to deliver swift bites, it was a predator that specialized in seizing moments. Fossil evidence shows Allosaurus tooth marks on the bones of the Diplodocus and Stegosaurus, suggesting that they could both actively hunt and opportunistically scavenge. They did not need to bring down a full-grown sauropod. That would be costly and dangerous. But a stray juvenile, or a weakened individual left behind, was an opportunity. The world of dinosaurs was not just a parade of giants, but a chessboard where every move could mean life or death. As time moved into the Cretaceous period, the world of predators reached a new peak. Towering above them all was Tyrannosaurus rex, the immortal icon of that era. Nearly as tall as a three-story building and weighing several tons, T-Rex was both a hunting machine and a colossal scavenger. For decades, debates raged. Was it an active predator or merely a scavenger? Increasing evidence shows it was flexible enough to be both. With an acute sense of smell, the strongest bite force in terrestrial animal history, and forward facing eyes granting stereoscopic vision, T Rex was not simply a monster, but a refined product of evolution, a master perfectly adapted to the chaotic world of the late Cretaceous. Alongside these giants, countless other theropods carved out their own realms. Velociraptor, small, only about the size of a modern turkey, embodied a different evolutionary path: intelligent, agile, and likely cooperative hunters. Fossil traces suggest they were not solitary, but coordinated, using speed and their sickle-shaped claws to bring down prey much larger than themselves. While T. rex or Allosaurus dominated through brute force, velociraptors and their kin chose strategy and collaboration. This was a testament to the boundless diversity of theropods, from thunderous giants to silent assassins. Beyond that, many theropods were the direct bridge to today's birds. Fossilized feather impressions discovered in China show that many small predatory dinosaurs had colorful plumage, initially perhaps for insulation, but later for communication or display. Archaeopteryx, the famous ancient bird, sat on the boundary between dinosaurs and birds, bearing feathered wings while still retaining claws and teeth. When we look at a sparrow or an eagle today, we are still looking at direct descendants of theropods, creatures that once walked alongside the colossal dinosaurs. What is astonishing is that while sauropods dominated the skies in size, theropods dominated them in ecological role. They maintained balance for the entire system. Without predators, the numbers of sauropods and other herbivores would have exploded uncontrollably, shattering the structure of ecosystems. Conversely, without giants as food sources, predators could not sustain themselves. This was the fragile equilibrium nature maintained for tens of millions of years. Every pounce, every chase, every failed or successful attack shaped the current of life in the Mesozoic. But theropods were not limited to an ecological role. They were also symbols of evolution's boundless imagination. One species could be a cold-blooded killer, another a small creature sprouting wings to soar. Some lived solitary lives relying on brute strength, while others coordinated within tight-knit packs. They teach us that evolution does not always choose bigger or stronger, but rather better suited for every niche in the world. Each theropod was a testament to nature's limitless creativity. And then, like the giant herbivores, most theropods vanished when the asteroid catastrophe struck at the end of the Cretaceous. Yet, unlike the sauropods, a small branch of theropods survived, evolving into today's birds. The morning songs, the wings spreading wide across the sky, all are the direct legacy of predators that once walked beneath the shadow of colossal dinosaurs. In every beat of their wings, we can still hear the distant echoes of the Mesozoic, an age where life reached both unparalleled greatness and unimaginable finesse. Within the colossal heartbeat of the Mesozoic era, theropod dinosaurs were not merely predators. They were the hidden rhythm of life itself. While sauropods painted a majestic picture of size, it was the carnivores that drew the taut sinews connecting species within an interdependent web. Each step of Allosaurus, each jaw snap of Ceratosaurus, or each cunning glance of Velociraptor was a note in nature's grand symphony. The astonishing truth is this: despite their differences in form, habitat, and hunting strategies, they all played the same role: maintaining order in the ancient world. Imagine a Jurassic plain. Herds of colossal sauropods move across the land, stripping an entire valley of greenery. Yet, lurking in the distance, hidden in the shadows, are medium-sized predators, perhaps Allosaurus, tracking every motion. When a young or weakened individual strays from the herd, the fragile balance is instantly tested. A chase unfolds, determining not only the fate of one life, but also feeding countless others, from small scavenging dinosaurs to tiny mammals waiting for their chance to snatch a share. In every meal, the food chain is re-established. Predation was not merely an act of killing, it was a regulatory mechanism, ensuring that life did not spill beyond its boundaries. By the Cretaceous period, the picture grew even more diverse. Giants like Spinosaurus chose a semi-aquatic existence, transforming into river-dwelling terrors, while Tyrannosaurus rex became the ultimate symbol of power on land. Yet alongside them, innumerable small creatures endured, feathered dinosaurs weaving through the canopy, hunting insects or tiny reptiles. In comparison, the ancient world was much like a modern city. The powerful ruled from above, but the most numerous and enduring populations belonged to the small beings at the bottom. Strength could shape fear, but adaptability defined survival. Beyond predation, theropods also stood as vivid witnesses to bold evolutionary experiments. Some were armed with sickle-shaped claws designed to slash open arteries. Others bore serrated teeth, slicing flesh like giant kitchen knives. Still others developed strange structures, from bony crests to sail-like spines, serving both as displays and perhaps as tools for thermoregulation. Each difference was nature's answer to the same question: how do you survive in a world of endless competition? And curiously, every answer found its place, at least for a time. Yet perhaps the greatest legacy of theropods does not lie in massive jaws or razor claws, but in a small branch that crossed the threshold of extinction: birds. From feather imprints pressed into Chinese limestone, from Archaeopteryx wings suspended between two worlds, we know that many small predators began to sprout feathers, learning first to display, then to insulate, and finally to fly. Each time we see a flock of sparrows burst across the sky, it is more than a simple scene. It is a distant memory of hundreds of millions of years of evolution. They are living witnesses, linking us to the age when Tyrannosaurus roared and Spinosaurus thrashed. What invites reflection is this: those who ruled through colossal size vanished after the catastrophic meteor strike, but the small, adaptable creatures carried on. This is one of nature's familiar paradoxes. The strongest are not always the ones who survive. Sometimes it is humility of form and cleverness in survival that hold the key to endurance. In this way, theropods leave us a lesson in resilience. Life is never bound to a single form. It always finds a way forward. And so, as we close the chapter on these great predators, their echoes have never truly faded. In the forest shadows, birdsong is the lingering resonance of claws that once spread terror. In the hunting gaze of an eagle, we still glimpse the reflection of the velociraptor's stare. Every breath of today's birds is a reminder that theropods never disappeared. They only changed form, changed their way of life to remain ever present. If sauropods teach us grandeur, theropods teach us persistence and transformation. A quiet power, yet eternal. If on the ground, dinosaurs wrote epic chapters of power and gigantism, then in the skies of the Mesozoic, another frontier opened, a world of wings, of wind, and of freedom. For as early as the late Triassic, a lineage of reptiles dared to cross the familiar three-dimensional limits, stretching out their transformed arms into instruments to conquer the ocean of air. These were the pterosaurs, the first creatures to truly master the sky with muscular power, rather than merely gliding like prehistoric insects. Imagine their skeletons: thin, hollow, light as if cast from glass, yet strong enough to withstand the relentless beat of wings. Their wings were not supported by the entire arm, but by a single, enormously elongated finger, stretching the skin into a thin membrane. The structure was so strange that, if you look at your hand and imagine your little finger extended 10 times the length of your arm, you can picture the bold experiment that evolution carried out. From the earliest small individuals that specialized in chasing insects, pterosaurs quickly expanded their world. By the Jurassic, they were everywhere, some the size of sparrows, skillfully weaving through forest canopies, others with wingspans of 10 meters, jaws lined with dagger-like teeth, skimming the sea's surface to snatch fish. Some species kept long, whip-like tails ending in small, diamond-shaped tips that may have helped balance. Others lost their tails entirely, instead sprouting enormous, colorful, and mysterious crests on their heads, perhaps for display or for recognizing each other in crowded skies. The oceans opened opportunities, and pterosaurs swiftly became supreme fish-hunting machines. Their jaws were long and narrow, teeth staggered like a comb, perfect for grasping slippery prey. Picture a flock of pterosaurs circling above the waves, each one diving into the water, giant wings brushing the foamy spray, then lifting back up with a wriggling fish clamped in its jaws. It must have been a familiar scene of the Cretaceous, not unlike today's gulls or pelicans. But unlike birds, some pterosaurs could reach the size of a bus when their wings were spread, the largest flying creatures the planet has ever known. Among them, none stood out more than the last giants, such as Quetzalcoatlus. With a 12-meter wingspan, they were taller than giraffes, capable of soaring over vast plains. These were no longer fragile creatures, but true sky warriors, able to glide for dozens of kilometers and yet also land to walk on all fours in search of prey. Fossils continue to fuel debate among scientists. Did they primarily soar like albatrosses, or could they also beat their wings powerfully like raptors? Either way, the truth is they existed and ruled the skies for tens of millions of years. And yet, the Mesozoic sky did not belong solely to pterosaurs. At the same time, from small theropod branches, another experiment began, the birth of birds. At first, they were only tiny feathered dinosaurs with wings but still bearing teeth, long bony tails, and claws on their wings, like the famous Archaeopteryx of the late Jurassic. They were not true birds as we know them today, but they had begun learning to glide from branch to branch, to use their wings as aids in movement, and, more importantly, to exploit feathers as flying tools. Feathers, astonishingly, were not evolved for flight at the start. They arose for warmth or for display in mating. But as these filaments grew more complex and layered, they began to interact with air, creating lift, and thus an entirely new function emerged, the ability to fly. This is precisely how evolution often works, not inventing from nothing, but reusing what already exists in unexpected ways. The Jurassic forests must have been a vibrant laboratory for these flight experiments. One can imagine a microraptor with four feathered wings launching itself from a treetop, gliding down through the canopy in pursuit of small prey. Or groups of other feathered dinosaurs leaping from branch to branch, testing their still, awkward wings. Above them, colossal pterosaur wings cast shadows across the plains, while beneath the leaves, tiny creatures were writing the first chapters of avian history. What is fascinating is that these two lineages, pterosaurs and birds, sometimes shared the same space. Along sea cliffs, perhaps they nested side by side, hunting fish from the same waters. Pterosaurs had the advantage of size and strength, while birds, smaller and quicker, darted into niches the giants ignored. A fragile balance, yet enough for both to coexist for tens of millions of years. The advent of flight did not only change ecosystems, but also behaviors. The ability to leave the ground opened new survival strategies, nesting high above to avoid predators, migrating seasonally to follow food, living in flocks to improve survival chances. The Mesozoic sky must never have been silent, the beating of wings, the calls of mates, the screeches of predators from above, all blending into a symphony without end. By the end of the Cretaceous, when the giant asteroid struck Earth, that sky changed forever. Pterosaurs vanished, taking with them an epic saga of colossal flying machines. But the small birds survived. Thanks to their small size, their adaptability, and their resilience, they endured the catastrophe and gradually became the familiar companions we know today. In the morning song of birds, we still hear the distant echo of an age when the skies belonged to winged dragons. The seas of the Mesozoic were neither empty nor peaceful. They were a vast kingdom where life evolved along strange and daring paths. While in the skies, pterosaurs and primitive birds experimented with wings, and on land, sauropods and theropods fought for dominance. Beneath the waves, a silent revolution was taking place. Reptiles moved into the oceans, abandoning the continents to claim mastery of the seas. When we look at the surface of the ocean today, we see blue whales, dolphins, and sharks. But if we step back more than 150 million years, the scene was entirely different. The creatures we would encounter were not whales, nor gigantic sharks like the Cenozoic megalodon. Instead, we would find hybrid beings that seem to have stepped out of mythology, bodies like fish, snouts like crocodiles, or necks that stretched endlessly like serpents. These were the sea dragons of the Mesozoic. The first pioneers were the ichthyosaurs, the fish lizards. Their ancestors were once land reptiles, but after the mass extinction at the end of the Permian, some species ventured into the water in search of new resources. Gradually, their bodies became streamlined, perfect for speed. With a dolphin-like shape, forked tails, and symmetrical paddles, they were born swimmers. Their enormous eyes, the largest ever recorded invertebrates, allowed them to hunt even in the deep, dark waters. A fish or squid passing by could be turned into a meal in the blink of an eye. Remarkably, ichthyosaurs took one further evolutionary step. They gave birth directly in the water. Fossils reveal embryos still inside their mothers and even specimens caught in the very act of giving birth. This proves that fish lizards were no longer tied to the land. They were permanent residents of the ocean. For tens of millions of years, they reigned as apex predators, ranging from slender species just a few meters long to giants like Shonosaurus, which stretched more than 15 meters, rivaling modern whales. Yet they were not the only rulers. Alongside them swam the plesiosaurs, another lineage of marine reptiles with body shapes unlike any creature alive today. With round, flattened bodies and four enormous paddles, they propelled themselves through the water with powerful strokes, as if flying beneath the sea. Some species evolved necks so long they made up more than half of their bodies, like Elasmosaurus, over 14 meters in length with a neck of 7 meters. Armed with this bizarre adaptation, they could reach into schools of fish or probe into coral crevices to snap up prey with needle-sharp teeth. By contrast, others, the pliosaurs, chose brute force. They had short necks and massive heads with jaws capable of crushing almost anything. Monsters like Kronosaurus or Liopleurodon haunted the seas of the Jurassic and Cretaceous, reaching 10 to 12 meters long with some of the most powerful bites among marine reptiles. They were apex predators able to bring down long-necked plesiosaurs, sea turtles, and even giant fish. Then, in the mid-Cretaceous, a new force emerged, the mosasaurs. Not related to fish or plesiosaurs, they were instead kin to modern lizards and snakes. Once they adapted to life in the sea, they rapidly conquered every ecological niche. With long, muscular bodies, strong tails that whipped side to side, and flexible jaws that could open wide like snakes, they could swallow huge prey whole. Some species, like Mosasaurus hoffmanni, grew over 15 meters long and were true tyrants of the ocean. They ate fish, squid, turtles, ammonites, and even one another. Fossilized stomach remains show the remains of seabirds, sharks, and other reptiles, evidence of their varied and voracious diet. Coexisting with these three giant predator groups was an entire rich ecosystem. Drifting at the surface were schools of ammonites, relatives of today's squid and octopus, encased in beautiful spiral shells. Some were no bigger than a fingertip, others as large as car wheels. They were both symbols of the ancient seas and vital prey for marine reptiles. Flowing among the currents were belemnites, ancient squid with bullet-shaped shells. Ancient corals built magnificent reefs that sheltered fish and crustaceans. Sharks and rays, long established, continued to roam and compete within this marine web. The Mesozoic seas were arenas of brutal struggle. A school of fish straying into an ichthyosaur's view could be wiped out in seconds. A long-necked plesiosaur might silently extend its head to snatch an unlucky squid. From the shadows below, a massive mosasaur could surge upward, swallowing a sea turtle in a single gulp. Fossils capture such moments. Tooth marks etched into ammonite shells, the bones of prey inside predators' bellies, even battles where both combatants perished. What made them extraordinary was their radical adaptation. Three distinct groups of marine reptiles, three evolutionary paths, yet all reached the pinnacle of dominance for millions of years. They showed that life endlessly experiments, redesigning bodies to exploit every possible environment. And as on land, the seas had their mightiest rulers, but nothing lasts forever. Ichthyosaurs declined before the Cretaceous ended. Plesiosaurs and mosasaurs survived longer, but were ultimately swept away in the mass extinction that also ended the reign of land dinosaurs. Today, we no longer see them swimming in the oceans, but their legacy still echoes. Each time we watch dolphins travel in pods or a blue whale engulf a shoal of fish, we are reminded of the kings that once ruled the ancient seas. Those sea dragons have vanished, but their story is preserved in stone, in fossils, and in our imagination. They are not merely bizarre creatures of the past. They are proof of life's power to adapt, showing that no matter the challenge, evolution always finds a way to rise.